The DOJ has a long tradition. If there's evidence of particular misconduct, for example, our former colleague, Senator Menendez, is currently incarcerated in prison for corruption. And if you've got evidence of criminal conduct of one individual, the Department of Justice has an obligation to investigate that. Would you agree that's qualitatively different than a fishing expedition targeting 20% of the Republicans in the Senate? Would you agree that's qualitatively different?
Let me ask you something right off the bat. What happens when the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the country start operating in secrecy and no one is held accountable? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear from this Senate hearing should concern every American who believes in transparency and equal justice under the law. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what the mainstream media won't tell you. Now let's break this down.
Ranking Member Whitehouse.
Just to follow up on that point, Mr. O'Leary, is the reason that a prosecutor would pursue a non-disclosure order for a toll record subpoena necessarily that it is the subject of the subpoena who would attempt to interfere with or obstruct the investigation, as opposed to the subject of the investigation who would attempt to interfere with and obstruct the investigation?
Senator, it depends on the investigation. It could be the subject of the investigation. It could be associates. The idea of a non-disclosure order is to not really let an individual know that they're under investigation.
But one cannot infer from the existence of a non-disclosure order any accusation that the subject of the order was intending to interfere or obstruct. It could just as easily be that it was actually the subject of the investigation, one of the conspirators, for instance, who the court was concerned about, who the prosecutor was concerned about.
It certainly could be, but as I was communicating to Senator Cruz, non-disclosure orders are a routine part of FBI investigations.
Understood. So in your view, what has happened to the FBI and DOJ's national security capabilities in the last 15 months?
They've been decimated. There's been generational damage done.
And with respect to the quiet bastion you referred to, and the standards of virtue and integrity that you spoke so passionately about, were those standards of virtue and integrity, the fidelity, bravery, and integrity of the FBI, met by agents who Kash Patel then turned on and fired?
There is rampant morale, degradation, uncertainty amongst the ranks, and really disheartened career federal public servants who've been dismissed without cause. And
because, in fact, their colleagues understood that they, in fact, met those standards for fidelity, bravery, and integrity, and were nevertheless fired, correct?
Correct.
DOJ and the FBI run under close institutional checks and balances designed to protect the integrity of the organization. Were those applicable to special counsel?
I would assume so. I wasn't involved in that investigation at all, but I can speak to the process that Washington Field Office would follow, and those are the agents that supported that investigation.
And they would follow traditional, regular FBI guidelines.
The documents that I was able to review demonstrated that.
Are you aware that the Trump Department of Justice in the first term subpoenaed information from members of Congress and members of Congress's staff, including toll records?
Senator, the FBI conducting public corruption investigations has been part of its mission for years. I know it's probably disconcerting to any member of Congress or public official, but the FBI does it with the same integrity that it conducts any investigation. I would say to a fellow Irishman, we would probably work with them on an investigation, but the FBI pursues these despite what side of the aisle you're on.
And they did in the first Trump term of office, and that included getting non-disclosure orders so that the members of Congress did not know their toll records had been subpoenaed, correct?
That is correct. It's routine.
Tell me a little bit, as we wrap up here, about the work of the CI-12 unit and what condition it is now in as hostilities with Iran exist.
So CI-12 is a foreign counterintelligence squad in Washington field office, and the agents that were dismissed from there and from the counterintelligence division at FBI headquarters work a variety of counterintelligence priorities. Iran is one of them, and dismissing some of these people just days before the war with Iran kicked off creates problems with sustained focus and could impact operations.
And in fact, some of the FBI's institutional knowledge is contained in the knowledge and experience of senior FBI agents. And so when they are purged for political reasons, that component of the Bureau loses something fairly significant.
That is true, Senator. So there were some senior leaders at headquarters that were removed. And then in this last year alone, 2 assistant directors from Washington field office were both removed.
My time is up. Thank you, Chairman.
We're looking at a heated Senate exchange involving Senator Sheldon Whitehouse questioning a former FBI agent about the use of non-disclosure orders. These are legal tools that allow investigators to secretly obtain records without notifying the person involved. And here's the key takeaway. The witness admits these orders are routine, they're used all the time. Not necessarily because someone did something wrong, but to avoid tipping off anyone connected to an investigation. Now on the surface, that sounds procedural. But here's where things start to raise eyebrows. The conversation shifts to the current state of the FBI and DOJ, and the testimony is blunt. According to this former agent, the last 15 months have caused what he calls generational damage to national security capabilities. Think about that for a second. We're not talking about minor setbacks. We're talking about long-term damage to institutions that are supposed to protect this country. He goes further, describing widespread morale issues, uncertainty, and experienced agents being dismissed despite meeting the FBI's own standards of integrity and professionalism. That's not just concerning. That's a structural problem. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. It's confirmed during the hearing that the Department of Justice under the Trump administration did in fact subpoena phone and email records from members of Congress and their staff, using those same non-disclosure orders to keep it quiet. And the witness makes it clear this isn't unusual. This is something the FBI has done across administrations as part of public corruption investigations. So let's be honest here, this isn't about one party or the other. This is about power and how it's used. But then Senator Ted Cruz steps in, and this is where the tone of the hearing changes.
Thank you. Without objection, I'd like to
With respect to the question of the NDOs and the reason for that, I'd like to put into the record the letter that I wrote to Speaker Johnson, giving what I consider to be the accurate background related to that, dated January 15, 2026.
Without objection, will be entered into the record.
Thank you.
Also, without objection, I want to introduce into the record a November 2nd, 2023 letter from Chairman Grassley to the DOJ, Office of Inspector General, raising concerns that in 2017, DOJ subpoenaed personal phone and email records of Republicans and Democrat congressional staff. I'm also entering into the record a November 8th, 2023 letter from me, Chairman Grassley, and Senator Lee to Attorney General Garland, raising similar concerns and requesting information on the subpoenas of congressional staff. Contrary to what Senator Whitehouse said in his opening, Republicans did raise concerns about the DOJ obtaining records from congressional staff of both parties. And I will say, just a minute ago, Mr. O'Leary, you were being asked by Senator Whitehouse about investigating members of Congress, and it is certainly true that DOJ has a long tradition if there's evidence of particular misconduct. For example, our former colleague, Senator Menendez, is currently incarcerated in prison for corruption. And if you've got evidence of criminal conduct of one individual, the Department of Justice has an obligation to investigate that. Would you agree that's qualitatively different than a fishing expedition targeting 20% of the Republicans in the Senate? Would you agree that's qualitatively different?
I'm not familiar with the details of either investigation, so I wouldn't want to speculate.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you be troubled if tomorrow the Trump Department of Justice issued a subpoena for the phone records of every Democrat that sits on the Judiciary Committee?
Not if it was based on factual evidence, specific and articulable facts.
Well, let me be clear. I'd be damn troubled, and that would be an abuse of power. And I'm going to predict not a single Democrat's going to say even a word about the abuse of power on their side, and that double standard is troubling. Senator Lee.
Cruz draws a sharp line between targeted investigations based on evidence and what he calls broad, sweeping fishing expeditions. He raises a hypothetical. What if the DOJ suddenly subpoenaed the phone records of every member of a Senate committee from one party? And his answer is clear. That would be an abuse of power. And here's the bigger point Cruz is making. Would both sides react the same way if the roles were reversed? That's the question a lot of Americans are asking right now. Because accountability shouldn't depend on which party is in charge. It should be consistent, it should be principled, and it should be transparent. Now let's talk about national security. The hearing also touched on the FBI's counterintelligence unit, specifically those handling threats from countries like Iran. According to testimony, experienced agents were removed right before rising geopolitical tensions. That means losing institutional knowledge. Years of experience walking out the door at a critical moment. That's not just a personnel issue. That's a national security risk. So where does that leave us? Here's my take. The American people deserve to know that their institutions are being run with integrity, not politics. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats, the rules must apply equally. Because once trust in these institutions erodes, it's not easy to rebuild. And that's why hearings like this matter. They pull back the curtain, even just a little, and give the public a glimpse into how power is actually being used behind the scenes. If you believe in accountability, transparency, and equal justice under the law, this is a conversation we need to keep having. If you made it this far, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and watch the next video on your screen right now, because we're breaking down stories just like this every day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.